Hi. Hello and welcome back to Shells and Shadows. Today I have another guest with me, Zach Perlman, otherwise known as my uncle, Zach. How are you today?
I'm awesome. It is a pleasure being here with you, my young friend.
Glad you're on here. Glad we get to do this. And um, I'm sure Safta, my grandmother, will be particularly happy to hear this episode following my dad's.
Yeah, I cannot imagine what it's like to have your grandkid interview your kid. She'll love it.
All right. So there's a lot we could get into, but why don't you start off by just sharing a little bit about who you are?
Loaded question. Um, in addition to being your uncle, um, well, I am the younger brother of obviously your father, which has me the baby of a very interesting family. So I'm sure you well know we come from just different stock. And with your father being who he is, successful he's been, and your aunt as successful as she's been, I've been the baby of the three my whole life. But finally in the last few years, I feel like I've kind of earned my stripes and become kind of the person your grandparents raised us to become. And it wasn't always a clear cut trajectory. Uh, You know where to begin with that, but I grew up in Omaha, obviously, which is a very different lifestyle than anything you guys could possibly know at this point. But back then, all I ever wanted to do was get out of the Midwest, thinking that somehow, some way, just outside of those boring cornfields, I was gonna find some magical life that was just gonna whisk me away. And um, as we know, that's not how things exactly work. When I went to CSU, your rival, obviously, I was a philosophy major with this idea that I got to change the world somehow. I'm part of this really dynamic family of doers, big people, healers, and let's be a philosophy major. Let's go philosophize, whatever the fuck that means.
As a philosophy minor who started as a philosophy major, I can understand that whole program is kind of dead end unless you want to teach philosophy. You got to like kind of branch outside of it.
Yes, vocationally, total dead end.
Yes, it's
Uh,
useful. It's very useful.
Existentially, I still use it every day.
Sure.
And that's one of those where, in all honesty, like, you and I have spoke of even just over at breakfast, like if I could go back in time and, do this, change that, whatever, like I wouldn't change a thing. At least, I'd treat a few people nicer along the way. But in terms of the choices I made regarding where I've gotten to, particularly my education, all that, no, like it has served me in ways I will never really know the full extent of. Not that it was the least bit vocational,
Yeah.
like you're saying, but no, it prepared me for a life of actively trying to think for myself and feel out my own way through this thing. Which again doesn't leave you a very clear cut roadmap what to do in your definitely in your 20s or even your 30s or whatever. And I struggled out of the gates after graduation. I mean, yeah, I backpacked around Europe for a few months that summer, came back, went up to Aspen, played the ski bum game for a few years there. But that was me just biding my time, just trying to bridge the gap between the hedonism of being, an armchair philosopher, weed smoker at Fort Collins who liked to hang out outside sometimes, and somebody who actually had to grow up and join the real world and pay dues and go to work and be accountable and all this. And like, I really struggled with that. Not the least of which I was in Aspen, Colorado, truly the first world person's getaway. Um, and here I was loaded with all of this, you know, historical wisdom of moderation and temperance and patience and all that. And it really just ate at me that I was a busboy serving the rich and famous, and didn't know what to do with that and just felt like a widget, like um, a soulless kind of working bot. And I wrestled with that for a long time. And as you know, like, well, I don't know if you've mapped it out that far, but I did what, serve tables for a good 8 years, bounced around between Aspen, Lake Tahoe, San Diego. Eventually came back to Colorado in what, 2011. Got luckily, well, served tables for a few more years, but luckily got whisked up into the cannabis industry, as you know. Had a good decade or so essentially making the sausage of my favorite obsession since what, I was 16 till I don't know now. But I thought I made it, man. I thought I arrived. I was a grower in a great industry, and even that didn't serve me. It was it was a doomed. I mean, it was doomed on a lot of levels, not the least of which the Colorado weed industry is basically shot at this point for anybody who wants to make money. But ultimately, I just found I loved it, and the universe had other plans. You know, no matter how good I was at my trade, no matter how fine tuned I could get my crops or my workers or what everything, um, the stars just never really lined up, and I never reaped the rewards remotely equivalent of what efforts I expended in that industry.
So you're at a like a crossroads at this point where you found this industry and been a dream of yours, and not waiting tables, felt like you have your trade, you have your skill set, and a decade is a lot of time to invest. You're in this moment where you can go in any direction really, which, and we talked about over breakfast, there's sometimes too many options and too many decisions. Is It's like paralyzing, it can be if we let it. So how did you then make the shift to what you do now, which I'll let you introduce, and how did you navigate like the bear of an opportunity, of the decision you had to make? It's a big choice. Where do I go next? How did you navigate that?
I love, perfect question, immaculate timing too. So, what was it? I guess it was almost 2 years ago now that I was up running a greenhouse up in an area in Moffett, Colorado in the mountains. They call Area 420. And it was one of those where, with God as my witness, I've never tried so hard at something and made so much lemonade with such a pile of moldy, shitty lemons, in that I was sold a bill of goods to go up there and run this monster of a greenhouse. Long story short, I was essentially watering what, 5,500 plus plants a day by hand, by myself, pruning, planting. I mean, everything. I was doing the job of three people. Got to a point where it completely got away from me because one person cannot run a 1 acre farm in a greenhouse. And ultimately, the individual who hired me and didn't know the first thing about the cannabis industry when he bought it, this operation sight unseen, he fired me halfway through the season because, frankly, I think he could see the writing on the wall that he was going to have to sell this thing for pennies on the dollar because he didn't know what he was himself into. He couldn't afford to invest the money he knew he had to get this thing right, and I was his biggest expense. So yeah, he cut me loose over the course of a random weekend. I woke up one morning after working another 60-hour work week to an email on Monday morning saying thanks but no thanks. We're going to go in a different direction. Bye bye. Which, in short, and again, I've never in my life logistically pulled off anything remotely this impressive. And that's coming from me, my own biggest critic.
Because that's not waiting tables. That's
Mm,
running a hefty operation in a big industry, something that
I mean,
has very much potential for opportunity. It looked like a huge opportunity, I'm sure.
oh, absolutely. I mean, yeah, well, he promised me all kinds of numbers to get up there. And honestly, it was one of those, for better, for worse. I found this individual as a friend of your deceased grandfather's, one of his best friends. So, just on a gentleman's contract, I said, "Hey, I'll go up there and do this for you with XYZ expectations for this amount of payoff." And look, he got sold a bill of goods. He didn't know what he bought into, which is to say, he passed off the loss of his investment onto me. He gave me an impossible task, and inevitably, I failed. And it's okay because, straight up, going back to your original question, all this, that threw me for such a loop. Like, if what I just did here, which was nothing short of a miracle, and I can show you pictures of the plants I was running on my own, by and large on my own. I had a little help. If that wasn't good enough and I was going to get fired and sent home by some dude who didn't know essentially his ass from a hole in the ground in this industry, as nice of a man as he was, then like, what the fuck am I doing here and why, universe? Like, and it busted me up hard. I moved out of my condo in Aurora, rented it out to go live in a rental up in Salida so I could commute 45 minutes each way every day to work 60-hour work weeks and just work my ass off, only to get fired. Um, and yeah, it was devastating. And I don't know if you and I've even talked about this yet, but you're you remember, like, what, 2 years ago, your dad, my brother, was running online philosophy groups. It was the Viktor Frankl Search for Meaning group. And we had a well, it was one of those things I'd never had the opportunity to participate because it was always like Tuesday at 2 o'clock or whatever. And God knows I was such a blue collar working man for a decade that like I never had time to go. Well, what do you know? All of a sudden, fired, devastated, all of my life's plans just completely thrown to the wayside. And so I just jumped online one day with your dad and a few of his other regular participants, just for the creature comforts of being around good, like-minded, warm people in a moment of my despair. And lo and behold, there's one of your dad's longtime friends, a lady named Nancy Jean Rose. I hope you're watching this. She was kind of telling what she does in the group, and she mentioned, I'm a death doula. And I was like, wait, stop. Excuse me. Did you just call yourself a death doula? Can you elaborate on that? And of course she did. And long story short, for those of you who haven't heard, in the year 2025, yeah, there are doulas for birth. Well, what do you know? There's ones for end of life too. So she explained to me that she, on a volunteer basis, she'd made her money in the .com era. So for her, it was more of a volunteer thing, but she's like the OG doula. Don't forget that. She told me essentially what death doulas do, and they walk by people on who are pretty much on their way out of life, giving them the dignity, the information, the hold the space for them to emote and get all the resources, information, and everything they could possibly need as they're approaching the end of their life. And as you know, death is a big part of our family, for better or for worse. And for right there in that conversation, it smacked me in the face. Like, that is, first of all, maybe the most noble profession I'd never even heard of until that point. Um, but that like this woman is leading a life doing something very akin to what 2001 version of freshman year at Colorado State Zach Perlman once wanted to be when he grew up. What is a philosophy major anyways? Like, what is philosophizing? What, holy shit, this lady is basically a living Socrates as far as I was concerned. And from that moment on, it completely changed my trajectory about thinking about what the possibilities could be for who I am. And that's not to say I didn't have a long, hard 6 to 8 months after that trying to get out of the rental in Salida that I was stuck to, because I'm now stuck in a town with nowhere I can even go work because, I went up there for a very specific salaried position, whatever. I had to work to get back to Denver. Long story short, I lived off my savings for a long time. I got certified as an end of life doula to do what Nancy Jean was doing. Your dad kind of warned me when I told him what I wanted to do that It was insanely noble and a beautiful trajectory to go down. But that specific career, unfortunately, is not recognized by Medicaid or insurances or anything, which is to say, it's really hard to get paid by dying people and or their families to help them go out with dignity, to help them get the information, the support, the comfort, whatever the things that unfortunately nobody wanted to pay for. And I spent almost a year pitching my being a doula with I don't know, like funeral homes, with senior living centers. I held writing workshops. I did all these things trying to figure out how I could leverage myself in the healing world, particularly in the world of helping. I don't know, for whatever reason, it really speaks my heart, helping people die, giving them the things they need because, largely based on what your aunt does for a living. Those of you who don't know, she's a world renowned psychic, and I'm as cynical as they get, but I've been watching what she does since I was in junior high, and it's unequivocally, empirically true what she does, which is to say, I'm fine with death. I know where we go after all of this, and I'm comfortable with it. And the idea of helping other people be good with that, such a beautiful concept. But again, it was one of those. I tried my best to do that. I volunteered in hospice for about a year, wasn't paying my bills, so like I had to pivot.
So I wanna pause here for a second.
You know,
You probably entered an industry surrounding the very thing that people spend most of their lives avoiding and avoiding talking about, which is death. But like you said, it's something that's very comfortable. It may be the right word in our family. It's interesting that your sister deals with afterlife. My dad is dealing with midlife, and you found yourself somewhere in the middle around end of life. Um, it's interesting, and it's noble is the right word because it's probably you probably had to have some uncomfortable conversations with people, but you also told me, I think, a few times that you spent a decent amount of time helping people write their stories and, compile just their life memories, something to give to their family. What was that like, and did anything like any stories stand out to you?
yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking. And that, so yeah, when Nancy was breaking down what a doula does, she pointed out, like, if you're going to try and make it in this industry, you got to find a niche. And naturally, as a philosophy major, and I didn't even mention I was a creative writing minor, writing is always a niche of mine. Speaking, I mean, words. I'm your dad's younger brother. Words are easy for me. But I did figure out pretty easy, or rather quickly, I should say, that getting people to talk about their life story has some sort of catharsis to them that I don't, it's hard to say, but I don't know that there's any more value you can give to somebody than really being present in hearing them recant who they are and how they got. And very specifically, what I've spent most of my time as a death doula, and mind you, we'll get to what I do currently, which is not that, but when I basically spent a year in hospice playing my cards, trying to make this industry work, I had the distinct pleasure of working with a gentleman. I'll go ahead and say his name, seeing as how I've published his memoirs for him. A gentleman named Kent Olson. And Kent was a beautiful old guy found in the last maybe 5 months of his life. And Kent, he was awesome. He's kind of one of the grumpy old men. You go into his room at the retirement home, and he would grumble about this and that, and he would act crotchety, even though he wasn't crotchety. He was just kind of a shtick. He was just a sweet old man who really just he wanted to crack jokes and he wanted just to get tell stories of somebody. And I used that as an opportunity one day, and I offered to him, I was like, Kent, if you want, like, I'm working on this new career and it would be really helpful to me if you'd be willing to let me type up some of your stories for you. He thought it was a great idea. And so we started doing that. Unfortunately, it was about maybe 3 months into my knowing him of the 5 months he was alive. But fortunately, it was long enough that we got a number of good stories, a number of them. And ultimately, we got in about 4 or 5 good interviews before his health went way down and it was gone to a point where his last 2 or 3 weeks, he just wasn't even there. But what I managed to get in those interviews, I went and I sat in the library there for a few hours every week with my interviews, and I compiled essentially what 14 pages or something of this man's life story. And his daughter, his adult daughter, she kind of knew this was going on. He lightly told her some guy named Zach was coming around and talking about my stories. She didn't really know what we were doing. And the day he died, well, I should say I met her at his bedside like 72 hours before he finally passed. He was basically out at that point, um, breathing and all that, but he was no more taking food, fluids, none of that. He was on his way out. And we sat and we kind of met and commiserated his bedside for 72 hours before. And then, yeah, before I know it, a couple days later, I get a call from hospice. My manager is saying he left, he was gone. At which point, I put the final touches on this story and I sent it to his daughter that she received a copy of her father's memoir unexpectedly just a few hours after his death. And that night, I receive a text from this woman that is about that long of text saying, I can't believe you did this for my family. I can't believe you did this for my dad. What you sent me, this memoir, I've probably read it 5 or 6 times already and I can't stop crying. And this is one of the best things anybody's ever given me in my entire life. And just the reaction I got from her from that was it was everything. It right if I never did anything again for the rest of my life, I would have felt as though it would have been worth it just to make that story for that woman to give her closure on her father who's no longer here. Um, and I even went to his memorial. I went to his funeral and the memorial service luncheon after that. And there were 50 copies of that memoir that were handed out to his friends and family and everything. And I'm going to go ahead and tell you at that little service, I had more people randomly come up to me, shaking my hand, treating me like I'm Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses because I took the time to sit with this man in his dying days to hear him out and publish stories about his life and put it together for no reason other than I liked him. Um, and I was treated like nothing short of true royalty for that. And if if that's all I ever get out of that career, that will be more than enough. But yeah, that set me up in a lot of ways for what I do now. Do you want to pivot into this?
Yeah, I'm glad we stopped for a second
Yeah.
because that's beautiful. And it's something that actually storytelling and collecting stories of someone is something that I learned from Safta, your mom, who did the same thing for Grandpa Jack. Um, and I think it was a few months before Howard's stroke, I sat down with him and for about an hour we just talked and I like recorded stories and I remember I just felt like I wanted to. And I remember hearing that he had had a stroke and, you know, he hasn't been in the same health since. And I'm so glad I had that opportunity. Um, it's really special. And I think more people should take that opportunity, especially for loved ones. I mean, like you said, all it took was you were just willing to, hear and write. I think it can be uncomfortable to like ask someone, "Hey, tell me your life story because I don't know how long I'll have left with you." That's not something that you want to approach a relative and say. It can be uncomfortable. But just last week, I sat down with a man, Bob, who's turning 93, and he's in our community. He's in great health, thank God. But we had this similar conversation, and he got to just tell me all about his life, from, his first love to his business to his children till now, his journeys, and incredibly powerful stuff. And I was just sitting there taking it all in, and I can see the value you got in doing that. Absolutely.
Hmm,
It's special.
it is. And you're not wrong. Your grandma, or my mom, the book she made about my grandpa Jack is it's basically my Bible. I mean, there's a lot of things I could kind of call my Bible, but it's one of them. One of the books of my Bible is having Grandpa Jack's story in a PDF in my pocket. And with where technology is in 2025, there's no good reason why every loved one shouldn't just get on Google Meets and record yourself and put it in the cloud and you live on for fucking ever. And that's such a small thing to do that when you're gone is worth so much more than any financial gain you could possibly imagine. Because when you're gone, you're gone. And if anybody remotely cared about you in your life, a living recording of your voice and your likeness and your spirit and all that is truly worth more than any material substance. You know? So yeah, telling your story is incredibly important. And as um part of when I was trying to get my doula thing off the ground, I was holding, like I told you, holding workshops, these senior centers, trying to get these senior citizens to hopefully pay me to help them write their life memoirs. And one day, this old guy, God love him, he essentially changed my life. He effectively said, okay, well, guess what? I have written my memoirs. Have you? It's like, no, I'm like 40 something. He's like, I don't care. Do you know you're gonna live to be, 41 or whatever? I was like, I know, touche. And seeing how I wasn't gainfully employed at that time, which is this is to say 2 winters ago, still coming back from getting fired from the Area 420 project and all that. I was like, you know what? I'm going to write the first installment of my memoirs. And I did. I spent 10 weeks effectively hanging out at the library, just banging away on a keyboard from just the deepest annals of my memory. And I hashed out something I'm rather proud of, a book called Creature Comforts, My Lifelong Evolution from Asshole to Zachary. And yeah, now that I've done that, it has, yeah, it's one of those. Did I write it to be a New York Times bestseller? No. Did I write it to, be rich or did no? I wrote it as a declaration of I'm here. I had a very weird way of getting here, and I think somebody might be able to benefit from being able to relate to rather, um, if not like my successes, hopefully my fuck ups. In my opinion, that's what it's all about, is kind of paying the narrative forward to the next person so they can, if not learn from your mistakes, at least find some solidarity and brotherhood or whatever in the fact that we're all struggling and trying to figure stuff out. But writing that book was a big deal for me because ultimately, in my trying to network and market it and all this, I found an individual, very inspiring individual who I now work for, named Domingo Cruz. He is the founder of a nonprofit based in Littleton, Colorado, called Rooted 303. It is an outreach organization where effectively we're just trying to find people in any and every walk of life who are struggling with whatever, and basically just walking alongside them, helping them get the resources and moral support they need just to find the courage to go on. Which is to say, a lot of it, yes, is rooted in drug and alcohol recovery. But truthfully, that's kind of where once upon a time it started, but it branches into all the various sects of adversity, which we all face as humans in the world, which is to say, surviving abuse, surviving poverty, homelessness, lack of education, you name it, we essentially address these people. And I found this individual, again, as I was trying to market this career of storytelling. And he's like, that's a beautiful idea. Would you like to become a peer coach and get certified and work with me and help people do all kinds of stuff, include tell their story? Like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. And so, yeah, last September, I found this guy, and it's just one of those like, and I got this from your dad actually towards the end of my trying to be a doula. And he said something to the effect of, you have a great idea, and great ideas oftentimes are just throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. And if it doesn't, you pivot. And if that doesn't work, you pivot, and you kept saying the word pivot until you find what works. And that's exactly what I did, which is to say, I'm now helping people in all walks of life. Not all of them are in the end of life phases. Some are, and I can use my doula skills for that. But in all reality, what I do now is I'm a peer support specialist, which is to say, I'm not, definitely not a therapist. I'm not a sibling. I'm not a spouse. I'm not a parole officer. I'm none of those things. I'm a peer. I'm another person honestly walking the crust of the earth, trying to figure out what I'm worth, what life is worth, and how to live more harmoniously on the planet. And in so doing, just getting people to level with me, saying what they're up against and how we together as a community can address your issues. Because the underlying thesis of what we do at Rooted 303, who I now work with, is the idea that community is everything. Human beings were built to be social creatures, and that the vast majority of the things that truly ail us at the core are lack of connection to our fellow people. And ultimately, whatever you're going through in life, somebody else out there most likely has something, if not just like that, enough like that, where if you can at least identify with them and see that you're not alone. I've come to find the strength in that, and showing people they're not alone is some of the most powerful shit I've ever been a part of. And that's what I do now. Yeah, I help people find resources, which is to say, oh, you need a sober living house. I got you. Here's a list of people to call. You need help with your food stamps. Call this number. You got this, whatever. But on a daily basis, what I'm truly offering my people and what they reflect back to me as my best offering is just looking at them, being honest with them, and saying, yeah, man, that sucks, or that must be really difficult, but like, we're going to get through it, right? Because this is what we do. We're survivors, and we believe in community. And somehow, some way, we use the pain of suffering, the Buddha's first noble truth of existence. We use that as a springboard to grow and be more than we were, right? And so ultimately, I'll be honest, I selfishly get so much hope and inspiration and just validation for all of my life experiences, all of my fuck ups, all of my derailments, all of my plans that didn't go according to my, best laid intentions, all of that. I get so much from my people reminding me that like all of that, which I once probably perceived as failure, no, that was really all just directing me to be right there, right then with them, to be my most authentic self. That is street worn. That is world weary. That is taking some serious, shots to the teeth in life. And um, but that's what it's all about, and taking that energy and belief in a lived, what do we call it, life experience, and passing it to the next person. And the power you get from that is like nothing you can ever take from
Wow.
something. We don't go shallow, huh?
No, not at all. It's not in our blood.
No.
Um, I love that because it reminds me of something that my rabbi told me. It's just like an idea or like a saying that the whole universe was created if or the whole universe was created, or we were put in this world at this point in time in this universe just to fulfill one good deed. And it's not to be taken literally, but it's saying that it's all worth the world for us to do that one thing that may have an infinite impact on someone. So you touched on it with your story of death doula, with the man whose story you recorded, but also, I mean, you don't have the slightest clue as to how one session with one of your clients will play out, 10 years from now. It's not within your knowing, but you're doing it. And, one shift of a degree can can have someone end up in a completely different place than they're in now. And that's something like for us to realize, but also for us to realize about how we interact with others. Because if we can make our own life shift by one degree, I mean, and end up in a completely different area, then how much can we do that for another person? And we're often more willing to do it with other people. You and I are pretty hard on ourselves.
We're both ones.
Yeah. Enneagram ones. Very, very critical of the self, but very, very willing to uh, not have that critical side with other people. And we're often more willing to see that good in others. And in that good that we see in others, it can help us find that in ourselves. And that's exactly what you said. It's not selfish. You're getting benefit from it, but look, I mean, we all get benefit from doing good things. It's the better way to, experience a pleasurable, enjoyable life is when when you derive it through that. They're doing good. So I love that.
I love that you gleaned all of that from what I said. And by all means, you're right. I mean, at its root, selfish. No, it's not selfish. Like, get out of my way, selfish. But
No.
one of my good friends, my best friends actually, Jason Gold, he once pointed out to me that like we're all selfish, the best of us. Mother Teresa was selfish, which is to say, if you're living right, you're living in accordance with your best self, and you should be taking care of yourself first, because that's the only way you are going to be worth anything to anybody. And honestly, it's taken me close to about 40 years to get right with me to a point where I can be this kind of person. When I was your age, I was so far from being remotely humble enough to even dip my toes in the universe of nonprofit or just the people business where human well-being is the end game capital. That just wasn't, it's like, yeah, I wanted to be the great philosopher, but I didn't really want to do it because I genuinely want to help everybody else. I wanted to do it because I wanted to be the dude. It took me about 2 decades worth of trying to serve myself to figure out like just spinning my wheels. And the truth is, I was as happy as I was on my best days growing weed, and there were some good days. I walked up, I mean, have my hands over some very literal high times gold, first place national championship weed, which is to say, I hit the top of the mountain in what one day was my, junior high wet dream of being, only to figure out that, like, okay, like, now what? Right? Like, okay, I didn't exactly arrive anywhere. I still had to show up at work the next day and do all of the boring stuff. And it was just like, that came and went and was kind of a fart in the wind. Which is to say, if that wasn't good enough, I don't know that I ever was going to find uh, any sort of Zach focused achievement that was going to ever make me fulfilled. And again, by the grace of the universe, I didn't have a choice. I was unceremoniously kicked out of that industry by the circumstances of the fact that, like, the job that I put it all out there for burned me, and there's no money left to be made in Colorado. We don't need to get into cannabis economics right now, but no. So I was never going to voluntarily leave what my ego told me. Oh yeah, no, you're going to be a great weed grower the rest of your life. No, no, I feel like the divine had better plans for my my highest ceiling of potential, which is to say, time to actually use that degree and relate to the people of the world. Give back to the people of the world some semblance of hope or energy or belief that like whatever you're going through right now is not permanent and that all things change as a matter of universal principle and somehow some way even though it's hard to wrap your head around it's all going to be okay. I know that's a really easy thing to say for a privileged white guy to say with a full stomach of food and a nice air conditioned studio in Boulder, Colorado. But like you and I both know, this is wisdom that transcends millennia here, which is to say, if you just let go to the fact that humans really don't have that much control over the universe, not nearly as much as we want to think we do, that things will take care of you if you believe that. Yeah, don't you go down that rabbit hole too far.
Well, that's also not something to be taken for granted that like you have that realization. You have all these things, clothes, food, like great privilege in this life, and you know it, and you appreciate that everything's going to be okay. Because what we were talking about at breakfast is that many people can have all of that and be very well off and still not be able to see or feel a single ounce of that out of just mere existential dread and worry and um, just an inability to see the bigger scheme of what's going on. We can have we think that we need everything and then we'll be okay. But the thing is that you can be in um, total shit internally and in a total state of just misery and have everything you could ever want around you and you wouldn't be able to feel a single bit of it. That's the terrible part. But I think what you're doing is you're hanging out with guys and girls who are really struggling financially and not just with addiction, but in all areas of life. And so you probably, I mean, you told me you've gained a greater appreciation for how we grew up, well off with parents that are willing to pay for education, things that we may often take for granted.
Yeah, and that's just one of the, I mean, that's one of the divine ironies of life. When you wake up in the ivory tower, you don't know you're there. Which is to say, you can have all of the things around you and just not be aware of how good you have it. Or maybe you didn't wake up in the ivory tower and you worked your way into the ivory tower, and somehow you still just get used to chasing the things or the comforts or the whatever. That's a very human thing, but like to your point in my book, actually, I have two chapters back to back. It's called Third World Royalty Part One, Third World Royalty Part Two. And these stories, the first one is well, they're both about the two most enlightened individuals I've ever met in my entire life, bar none. By my Latin Buddhist understanding, if I had to say I've met two people who've reached nirvana, I would say they're probably these two people. One of them was the poorest individual I've ever met. He was traveling Europe with €6 in his pocket and just getting by on goodwill of people and being a genuinely fearless and loving and embodying all the things of like a third world superhero. And he was the closest thing to like a living sage I've ever met. And the dude was poorer than anybody I've ever met. Later that summer, first year out of college, working tables, bussing tables in Aspen, the the dude from San Salvador, just the smallest, is like this tall, worked the cold salad bar at the five-star Italian restaurant I was working at. He worked probably 80-hour weeks nonstop, always had a smile on his face, whistling, singing, whatever. He probably made nothing. Every single dime he made, he sent back to his family in San Salvador. He commuted at least 2 hours every day. As far as I could tell, he was living a life of indentured servitude. But again, he didn't give a shit. He was every day you talk to Antonio, it was chingon chingon, which is to say, everything's awesome. And he had nothing, which to this, I'm still thinking about these people 2 decades later. They've probably long forgotten about me. I haven't forgotten about them. Two, on paper, of the poorest people I probably will ever meet, bar none, happier than pretty much anybody I know today. And you can't fake that stuff. And if anything, it just I get a sense of poetic justice in my philosopher's heart that like suffering is worth it if the Antonios and Dvorin, he was the Slovenian traveler, if even a few of those people walk the earth fearlessly and in just absolute pure love, then like maybe this whole suffering to actualization thing is worth it. Do I know it is? I don't know it is. I want to believe it is. I mean, I'm still here. But those are the people I think about when I'm having a day or when I'm trying to figure out my self worth or why even bother deal with the world as it is right now. Um, which is ironic because guys, people like that aren't exalted. That's not who we're clamoring after on Instagram or TMZ or whatever. Like those in the world of the rich and famous and the omni desirable things society would have of you, they're peasants. In my world, they are royalty that should be exalted for millennia. And that's all. I just need a few of those people to keep here, and that's enough to keep me going. And that's what I try and be for other people in whatever degree. And to your point, yeah, I'd like to believe I've affected people in ways I will never know. Um, but at the end of the day, all I can do is just show up and be me and be honest. And it's funny, this is all just stuff your grandma and grandpa taught
Uh, I'm sure Soft is listening and is enjoying this conversation.
us.
I keep like as we talk, I keep thinking of her because I know she's gonna be like the one who sends this out to her friend and the one that shares this with people. But I have learned a lot from her and from my parents in particular about this, especially everything related to like finding meaning and suffering. Like become my dad's work, and I've seen him like grow into that, which is a weird thing to say because normally, maybe not normally, but your father has his career and his journey, and you grow up and it's like, oh, it's my dad and his job. No, I saw my dad like build this and find this from something else that wasn't for him, being a rabbi, and like you doing similar things, going from your story into this world, and um, I think there's something there. There's something special with that. Do you think you'd go back at any point to the death doula work if you?
If it was paying my bills, I would be hanging out in hospice all day long.
Yeah.
I loved hospice. And shout out to all hospice workers, all caretakers of all sorts, CNAs, everybody. Talk about unsung heroes. Oh my God. Watching watching people in their last 6 months of life is a very humbling thing. Um, but it's a beautiful thing if when you see people who've lived a good life who are also living out a good death, which is to say being open and honest and not hiding from it. And yeah, and I love all that. And someday, God willing, if well, not in this administration's time, but if we start to fund things like that in the healthcare system, which we absolutely should, absolutely, I would be a full-time death doula. And it's one of those things where I could always go back to that. And let's get real. I have people. I mean, I served like what 18 to 80 something year olds. So inevitably, some of my peers are going to cross these bridges or come close to crossing them, at which point, yeah, I'll definitely help them as just part of our one-on-one mentoring. I'll do all that as part of that. Um, yeah, I mean the truth is like if it's death related, if it's not death related, I'm happy to find like I've finally found anything, figured anything out since 20 years ago next week, since I walked across Moby Arena with my philosophy degree. It's that my salvation, if there is such a thing, is definitely being lost in the service of other people. Because for 40 some years, being of pure service to me was just a fool's errand. There's no amount of money to be gained. There's no amount of, women to be had or six packs to be crunched out or whatever that was ever going to bring me to some sense of fulfillment or across a finish line. Like, yeah, yes, I arrived. Never. I don't feel like I've arrived at this point, but I at least feel like I'm in the right stadium. It's nice.
I don't I don't know if that feeling of arrival is something that happens or if it's something that we think will happen and we chase it. Um, I'm sure you've with your Buddhist teachings that you've probably looked at know that a lot of like world wisdom says that you have to look at yourself in each moment that you arrive in as having arrived fully, and like this moment is not a means to a greater end later, which goals are important and we should have good aspirations, but like right now is like an end in and of itself, and that's where we find fulfillment. If we can look at everything right now as this is exactly what all of that was for, is right now. It may be the most mundane thing ever, but there's inherent value in right now. Those guys that you met who traveling with €6 or working, sending every penny back to their family overseas, I'm sure that they lived that without even speaking it. They just kind of embodied that. I've met hopefully people that are like that from what I can see are like that, and that's like what they give off.
Yeah. Um, I don't even know how to follow that. I mean, there's a power to living in each moment and not living in the past, not living in the future, which, like, let's get real, the hardest thing for almost all of us to do, starring me, is just being present in the moment. Because, yeah, we don't ever arrive anywhere. And, like, life is lived in the margins, as they say. Yeah, you have your mitzvah, you have your graduation, you get married, you have all these, like, milestones, but, like, those are great, but like, let's get real. Life is talking, trash with your favorite clerk at the gas station. Life is making friends with, your coworkers or having inside jokes with old friends or whatever. Really mundane stuff. Like, if you can find the joy in that in every given moment, and this is nothing but moments, that's as rich as you can possibly be. But like, let's get real. What I just said in theory and in practice are two totally different concepts.
Very different.
And again, I have arrived there here. I have to practice that consciously every single day.
So I have one last question for you. Um, Given that the target of this podcast is younger people who may be looking to learn from your mistakes or maybe looking to look at your story and understand, okay, what do I do with my life? So, what is something, a lesson, or just an idea from your book that you want to leave my generation with just to move forward?
It's fantastic. Um, I would say first and foremost, how you treat people is everything. Took me a long, I mean, you hear this from preschool, the golden rule, and all these things. And yeah, it makes sense to a certain degree the whole way through if you're not a sociopath. Um, but really, coming to a point in life where you look back and you think, why was I such a dick to that person? Why was I like that? Like, what was that worth it? Did it change my end game? Did it change the result of the world? The fact that they did this or didn't do that or whatever? And it's like, it really doesn't matter. So little of what we practically do on a day-to-day basis, the sales you make or the ditches you dig or whatever. Yeah, we need these things to live in humans, but like it's really not the stuff that matters. How we treat each other is what matters. And it kind of goes to one of those sayings I really love. I'm a collector of quotes. One of them is, nobody's ever really going to remember exactly what you said, but they will remember how you made them feel. And yeah, making people feel like life is worth it, that um, whatever their struggle is, it's part of higher order, and that there are other people here to support you, and someday you'll have the opportunity to support them, and that'll be such an honor when you do. That's It took me a long time to figure that out the hard way, chasing all the conventional money, women, cars, all that kind of stuff. Um, yeah, and like, and the truth of the matter is, in my heart, in the wisdom of your parents and grandparents, and this specifically shouting out your grandpa Shelley, if you lead with love and you are honest and you are genuine, the world will see that, and the world will open up to you, which is a very hard thing to do because the world we live in, it is in the Thomas Hobbes version, it is short, nasty, and brutish, this life, if you choose to look at it like that. But yeah, if you're willing to take those punches and show up every day and still don't let it get the best of you and learn how to just love in spite of the pain, in spite of the struggle, things just work out. And I don't know any rhyme or reason to it. I wish I did. But in my grandest theory of the what and why of all of this, I don't think we're supposed to know in here. We're supposed to figure it out. So yeah, make some mistakes and be okay with it, because you're gonna fuck up. We
Yeah.
all fuck up. It's what you do with it that matters. And as long as you're honest with your mistakes and where you're at in trying to choose a different trajectory going forward, I have a hard time faulting anybody, whatever your mistake was. If you're genuine in wanting to be different, choose different, be different, and you can create a different world for yourself.
Well, I hope this conversation inspired one person and helped them move 1% in 1 degree in a better direction. That's all I could ask for from doing this. That was my intention in going into this whole podcast with you, but also this series in general, through Shells and Shadows. And um add this episode right now to your, memoir in the cloud. This will be out on the internet, but also, these conversations exist eternally in some sense. And so, both for you and I, this is a record and proof that we are here, and we're doing our best, and we did something worthwhile. So let the world be witness to that.
I'm so fucking proud of you, brother. Love you,
Love you,
man.
man. Glad we did this.
Absolutely, you too.